January 1945. A heavy-duty flatbed train car groans under an immense weight as it pulls into the rail yard at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, USA. A team of senior ordnance officers waits on the platform, their breath visible in the freezing air. They are not here to inspect a new American prototype. They are here to touch a nightmare. Chained to the flatbed is a Panzerkampfwagen VI Ace B, known to the German troops as the Tiger II, and to the terrified Allied tank crews as the King Tiger. It was captured intact near the Belgian village of La Glaise during the collapse of the Ardennes offensive. It has traveled across the Atlantic not just as a trophy, but as a prisoner of war that refuses to speak. Major Thomas Erickson, a veteran automotive engineer for the U.S. Army Ordnance Department, steps forward. He has read the intelligence reports. He knows the fear this machine generates. The reports from Normandy and the Bulge are consistent. Allied shells bounce off its frontal armor like pebbles. Its 88mm gun can destroy a Sherman tank from distances where the American gunners cannot even see the target. To the Pentagon, this vehicle represents the apex of armored warfare, an unstoppable predator. But Erickson is not looking for the gun. He is looking at the tracks. As the crane operators attempt to position the heavy lifting gear, the sheer physical reality of the machine becomes apparent. It weighs nearly 70 tons. The ground shakes as it is maneuvered off the rail car. The concrete of the loading dock cracks audibly under the pressure. Erickson circles the beast. It is a masterpiece of intimidation. The sloped armor plates are massive, welded with a precision that speaks of high-tech German industry. But as he walks around the rear of the vehicle, he notices something that contradicts the image of the invincible war machine. There are no battle scars on the rear engine deck. The paint is not scorched. The tracks are not broken. This tank was not destroyed in combat. It was abandoned. This is the paradox that has brought Erickson and his team of metallurgists and engine specialists to the yard. Why would a German crew, commanding the most powerful tank on Earth, simply walk away from it? The Pentagon assumes the answer lies in a mechanical breakdown or a lucky airstrike, but Erickson suspects the answer is far more systemic and far more dangerous. The team begins the initial external assessment. The width of the vehicle is staggering nearly 12 feet. It is too wide for most European bridges. It is too heavy for standard recovery vehicles. Erickson runs his hand over the steel road wheels. They are interleaved, a complex overlapping design characteristic of German engineering. It distributes the massive weight effectively. But looking at the mud packed tight between the wheels, Erickson sees a maintenance nightmare waiting to happen. It looks like a watchmaker built a battleship, one of the junior engineers remarks. He is right. The engineering is exquisite. The machining tolerances are tight. It is a beautiful machine. But in war, beauty is often a liability. The order is given to open the engine hatches. The team prepares to look into the heart of the beast. They expect to find a power plant of mythical proportions, something massive enough to move 70 tons of steel across a battlefield. They expect an engine that matches the terror of the 88mm gun. What they are about to find will shock them, not because of its power, but because of its insufficiency. The Pentagon fears the King Tiger's armor. Erickson is about to discover that the King Tiger's true enemy was not the American Sherman, but the laws of thermodynamics and logistics. The investigation into the death of the German war machine begins here, under the hood of its greatest warrior. The massive rear deck of the King Tiger is cleared. Using a heavy crane, Erickson's team lifts the armored grills to reveal the engine compartment. The air in the hangar changes. There is a smell of stale gasoline, burnt oil, and something more clinical, the scent of an industry pushed to its absolute limit. Nestled inside the steel cavern is the Maybach HL 230 P30. It is a V12 liquid-cooled engine, a piece of engineering that, on paper, is a marvel. It is remarkably compact for its output, producing 700 horsepower. Erickson leans in with a powerful flashlight. He notes the complexity of the fuel lines, the dual carburetors, and the intricate cooling system. To a civilian engineer, it is a work of art. To a military logistician, it is a suicide note. The Pentagon's intelligence had suggested the King Tiger was powered by a revolutionary engine. They expected something equivalent to the massive power plants found in naval vessels or heavy bombers. But as Erickson cross-references the technical plates, he realizes a shocking reality. This is the exact same engine used in the 45-ton Panther tank and the 56-ton Tiger I. The Germans had added 15 to 25 tons of steel, increased the armor thickness to nearly 7 inches on the front, and mounted the heaviest tank gun in existence. But they had not upgraded the heart. Erickson's team begins the first cold start test. They fill the tanks with high-octane Allied fuel, far superior to the synthetic gasoline the Germans were forced to use by 1945. The starter motor whines a high-pitched, strained sound. After 3 attempts, the V12 roars to life. The sound is not a deep rumble like the American radial engines. It is a mechanical scream, a high-frequency vibration that rattles the tools on the workbenches 10 feet away. As the engine warms up, Erickson watches the flow meters attached to the fuel lines. The needles jump. Even at idle, the consumption is aggressive. But it is when they engage the transmission that the true horror of the King Tiger's logistics begins to emerge. To move 70 tons from a standstill requires an immense surge of torque. As the test driver throttles up, the flow meters don't just move, they spin. Erickson records the initial data. In soft terrain, the King Tiger is consuming fuel at a rate that defies military logic. It isn't measured in miles per gallon, it is measured in gallons per mile. One of the specialists calculates the numbers and looks up, his face pale. "Major, if this data holds, a full tank of fuel, nearly 190 gallons, will only take this machine about 40 miles in combat conditions. That's not a patrol. That's a one-way trip to a breakdown." Erickson realizes that the Pentagon had been terrified of the King Tiger's gun, but they should have been studying its fuel tank. The German High Command had built a Predator that required a constant intravenous drip of fuel just to stay conscious. On the fluid battlefields of 1945, where supply lines were being torn apart by Allied air power, the King Tiger was not a weapon of breakthrough. It was a stationary bunker that occasionally moved. The engineering report begins to take shape. The shock in Berlin wasn't just that the Americans had captured the tank. It was the realization that the Americans now saw the King Tiger for what it truly was. An industrial masterpiece that was strategically irrelevant because it could not be fed. Erickson moves his focus from the fuel lines to the belly of the beast. To translate 700 horsepower into movement for a 70-ton chassis, the King Tiger relies on the Maybach HL OG 401216B transmission. It is a pre-selector, semi-automatic gearbox with 8 forward speeds. On the shop floor at Aberdeen, the engineering team begins to disassemble the housing, and what they find is a masterpiece of over-engineering that borders on madness. The gears are cut with surgical precision. The synchronization rings are complex. In a laboratory setting, this transmission is a triumph of mechanical science. But Erickson, looking through the lens of battlefield reality, sees a fatal flaw. This gearbox was originally designed for a vehicle 20 tons lighter. By pushing it to move the King Tiger, the Germans had placed every tooth and bearing under a level of stress that left zero margin for error. As the team runs the stress load simulations, the data confirms their suspicions. In a Sherman tank, a driver can be aggressive, clashing gears and forcing the machine through obstacles. In the King Tiger, the driver must be a technician. If a crewman, panicked by an incoming Allied shell, tries to force a turn or shift too quickly on a muddy slope, the internal torque loads exceed the steel's sheer strength. The transmission doesn't just fail, it shatters. Erickson notes a chilling statistic in his report. The average lifespan of a King Tiger's final drive, the gears that actually turn the tracks, is less than 150 kilometers. In the Ardennes, many of these invincible tanks didn't fall to American bazookas. They fell to their own weight. A 70-ton tank with a broken final drive is nothing more than a very expensive, very heavy pillbox. The team then examines the steering mechanism. It is a double differential system that allows the tank to turn in place. It is smooth and requires very little physical effort from the driver, unlike the brute force levers of the American M4 tractor. But this luxury comes at a price. The complexity of the hydraulic seals and the planetary gear sets means that if the system leaks a common occurrence under the vibration of a V12 engine, the tank becomes impossible to steer. They built a weapon that requires a factory to follow it into the mud, Erickson remarks to his lead mechanic. He realizes that while American industrial philosophy focuses on over-engineered simplicity and parts that are overbuilt for abuse, German philosophy had chased a technical perfection that was too fragile for the chaos of war. The fuel consumption data, combined with this mechanical fragility, paints a devastating picture for the Pentagon. The King Tiger consumes 5 gallons of fuel just to start and warm up. It consumes more to engage the gears. By the time it reaches the start line of a battle, it has already exhausted a significant portion of its logistical reach. Erickson's team calculates that for every hour of combat, the King Tiger requires 3 hours of intensive maintenance. It is a system in a state of constant self-destruction. Erickson stands beneath the towering hull of the King Tiger, looking at the massive steel tracks that are nearly 32 inches wide. These tracks were designed to keep the 70-ton beast from sinking into the soft earth of the Russian steppe or the mud of the Ardennes. But as he examines the suspension, he encounters the most controversial feature of German armored design, the Schachtelaufwerk, or interleaved road wheel system. The system consists of 9 overlapping axles on each side, with large steel wheels layered one over the other. To a German engineer, this was a logical solution to distribute 140,000 pounds of weight while providing a stable firing platform for the 88mm gun. But Erickson sees the logistical trap. If a single inner road wheel is damaged by a mine or a mechanical failure, the crew must remove up to 5 outer wheels just to reach it. On the testing grounds, Erickson orders a frozen mud simulation. They pack the gaps between the interleaved wheels with wet soil and debris, then allow it to settle. The results are catastrophic. On a standard American Sherman or the M4 tractor, the suspension is open, mud simply falls away. On the King Tiger, the mud packs into the overlapping layers and hardens like concrete. In the freezing winters of Europe, this meant that a Tiger II parked overnight could find its suspension frozen solid by morning, rendering the tank immobile. Erickson's team records a chilling reality. To replace one inner road wheel in field conditions takes a German crew over 6 hours of grueling labor with specialized heavy tools. An American crew can perform a similar repair on an M4 chassis in under 45 minutes with basic equipment. The fuel consumption data begins to climb even higher during these tests. Erickson notices that as the mud accumulates in the suspension, the rolling resistance increases significantly. The Maybach engine, already strained to its limit, must burn even more fuel just to overcome the friction of its own clogged wheels. In heavy mud, the fuel consumption nearly doubles. The Germans didn't just build a tank, Erickson writes in his daily log. They built a high-maintenance prisoner. He realizes that the King Tiger's suspension was optimized for the initial 10% of the battle, the long-range engagement. But for the 90% of the war, the marching, the repositioning, and the survival in the elements, it was a liability that drained the Wehrmacht's dwindling fuel reserves and exhausted its mechanics. The Pentagon had feared the King Tiger's armor, but Erickson's report is revealing a different truth. The tank was so complex that it was effectively self-sabotaging. Every design choice made by Berlin to achieve technical perfection had created a secondary front, a war against their own logistics that they were destined to lose. Erickson turns his attention from the mechanical failures to the very thing that made the King Tiger a legend of terror: its armor. The frontal plate is a massive slab of rolled homogeneous steel, 150 millimeters thick and sloped at 50 degrees. On paper, this makes it immune to almost every Allied anti-tank gun in existence. But as Erickson's metallurgists begin to take core samples and conduct ballistic impact tests, they uncover a dark secret about the state of German industry in 1945. The team uses a captured German 88mm gun to fire at a stationary King Tiger hull. They expect the high-quality Krupp steel to deform slightly under impact, absorbing the energy. Instead, they witness a phenomenon called spalling. Upon impact, even if the shell does not penetrate, the internal face of the armor plate shatters, sending a lethal spray of razor-sharp steel fragments, shrapnel, into the crew compartment. Erickson's report identifies a critical shortage in the German supply chain: molybdenum. By late 1944, Germany had lost access to the rare minerals required to make high-quality, ductile steel. To compensate, they had increased the carbon content and heat-treated the armor to be extremely hard. But hardness is not toughness. The King Tiger's armor had become brittle. It was no longer a flexible shield. It was a giant porcelain plate waiting to crack. The fuel consumption data takes another grim turn during these ballistic trials. Erickson realizes that the massive weight of this armor, added to protect a crew from shells, was actually killing the tank's mobility. The King Tiger was so heavy that it could not move quickly enough to evade fire or reposition to a flanking threat. It was forced to rely entirely on its frontal armor, but that armor was now failing due to poor industrial resources. The Pentagon feared a tiger with thick skin, Erickson writes. What we found was a tiger with a shell of glass. He notes that the sheer weight of the armor created a vicious cycle of failure. More armor required more fuel. More fuel required larger tanks. Larger tanks added more weight, and more weight caused the brittle armor to crack under the strain of its own movement over rough terrain. The investigation reveals that many King Tigers were abandoned by their crews, not because they were hit, but because the vibration of the Maybach engine and the stress of driving over uneven ground caused the brittle welds to simply snap. The tank was literally shaking itself to pieces before the Americans even fired a shot. The myth of the invincible King Tiger was being dismantled, revealing an overstretched empire trying to hide its industrial collapse behind a facade of massive but flawed steel. Erickson climbs into the commander's cupola, moving his focus to the only part of the King Tiger that still commands absolute respect: the optics. Mounted in front of the gunner is the TZF-9D, a binocular telescopic sight manufactured by Zeiss. As Erickson peers through the lens, the world outside the hangar is transformed. The clarity is staggering. Even in the dim light of the Aberdeen facility, the magnification and light-gathering capabilities of the German glass allow him to see individual bolt heads on a target a mile away. This is the Predator's eye. The German optics were designed for a very specific type of warfare, the long-range ambush. With this glass, a King Tiger could engage and destroy an American Sherman tank before the American crew even realized they were in a kill zone. To the Pentagon, this was the ultimate tactical advantage. But as Erickson begins to cross-reference the optical performance with his fuel consumption data, he realizes the German designers had fallen into another technical trap. The King Tiger's optics were so specialized for long-range, stationary firing that they became a liability in a fluid, moving battle. The field of vision was narrow. In the close quarters, hedgerow fighting of Normandy, or the dense forests of the Ardennes, the King Tiger was nearsighted. It had the sight of a sniper, but the agility of a mountain. Erickson's report highlights a devastating irony. The Germans had invested thousands of man-hours into perfecting the world's best tank sight, but the tank itself consumed so much fuel that it could rarely afford to stay in motion long enough to find a superior firing position. During the testing, Erickson records that for every minute the tank spent idling while the gunner searched for a target through those magnificent optics, it burned enough fuel to move a jeep for 20 miles. The Zeiss optics are a masterpiece, Erickson writes in his summary, but they are mounted on a platform that is strategically paralyzed. He realizes that the King Tiger was a collection of perfect parts that refused to function as a perfect system. The Germans had focused on the most powerful gun and the best sight, but they had ignored the how to keep the machine fed and moving in a war that was being won by the side with the most efficient logistics. The Pentagon's shock was deepening. It wasn't just that the King Tiger was flawed. It was the realization that German engineering had become obsessed with winning individual duels while completely losing the war of industrial movement. Erickson climbs back into the cramped interior of the King Tiger to evaluate the human-machine interface. He realizes that the physical and mental toll on the five-man crew was another hidden factor in the tank's failure. While the exterior of the Tiger II screams power, the interior reveals a paradox of high-tech luxury and crushing ergonomic stress. Every control in the King Tiger is heavy, requiring a level of precision that demands constant focus. The driver, in particular, lives in a state of perpetual anxiety. Because the Maybach engine is so overstressed by the 70-ton load, the driver must listen to every vibration and shift gears with the delicacy of a surgeon. One wrong move on a muddy slope doesn't just stall the engine, it can shatter the final drive, turning the tank into a permanent steel tomb. The fuel consumption data reveals a psychological timer that haunts the commander. Erickson notes that because the King Tiger consumes fuel so aggressively, burning 5 gallons just to warm up the crew, is constantly aware that their tether to safety is incredibly short. In combat, this creates a FOMO, fear of missing out, on a strategic level. The fear that if they don't win the engagement immediately, they will run out of fuel and be forced to abandon their multi-million-mark machine. Erickson's team conducts a fatigue study on the maintenance requirements. They find that for every hour spent in motion, The crew and specialized mechanics must spend 3 hours servicing the complex interleaved wheels and the high-pressure hydraulic systems. Unlike the American industrial philosophy, where a vehicle is designed for standardized simplicity, the King Tiger requires an elite watchmaker level of care in the middle of a muddy battlefield. The Americans built machines for soldiers. The Germans built machines that required their soldiers to be servants. Erickson writes in his report. He sees that the German crews were exhausted, not just by the enemy, but by the relentless demands of their own equipment. The King Tiger was a vampire of resources. It drained the Reich's fuel, it drained its industry, and ultimately, it drained the will and energy of its most elite tankers. The Pentagon is beginning to understand that the invincibility of the King Tiger was a facade. It was a predator so heavy and hungry that it eventually collapsed under its own weight, leaving its crews to walk away from perfectly functional guns because they simply could no longer keep the beast alive. The system has encouraged you to take the easy route, the digital route, precisely because it allows them to maintain the price suppression. By holding paper silver, you have unknowingly subsidized the very entities that work to keep the value of your asset artificially low. As the truth emerges, we will see a complete collapse in the value of paper-silver products relative to the physical metal. Those who refuse to hold it will find that they truly do not own it. This is the bail-in of the commodities market, where the wealth of the digital investor is sacrificed to protect the systemic insiders. We must also consider the geopolitical angle, which is often ignored by the mainstream financial media. A significant portion of the silver that has vanished from the COMEX vaults has not disappeared into thin air. It has ended up in the Shanghai Gold Exchange. China has been quietly and methodically accumulating silver as a strategic asset, likely to back a new reserve currency or to secure its total dominance in the green energy sector, the very sector that Western tech giants are now panicking over. This is not merely a trade, it is a tectonic shift in global power. The West is being left with financial derivatives, unpayable debts, and empty promises, while the East holds the tangible resources necessary to build the infrastructure of the 21st century economy. This zero inventory report we are analyzing today is, in fact, the tombstone of American financial hegemony in the commodities markets. For decades, the ability to set the price of raw materials through paper manipulation was a cornerstone of Western control. That era is ending in real time. As the pricing mechanism moves to Shanghai, the West loses its final lever of influence over the global supply chain. We are witnessing a transition where the power to define value is moving from those who print money to those who possess the atoms. The silence from the regulators, the CFTC and the SEC, is noticeably deafening. Their primary mandate is to ensure orderly markets, yet they have presided over what can only be described as the complete looting of the exchange. This silence suggests not just incompetence, but complicity. They know the vaults are empty. They are praying that the general public remains distracted by the noise of the spot price long enough for the insiders to position themselves for the inevitable reset. They are managing the collapse, not trying to prevent it. They want to keep the illusion of normalcy alive for as long as possible, while the lifeboats are being filled by the elite. Investors must realize that the smart money has already exited the US dollar. The run on the silver vaults is, at its core, a run on the currency that prices it. When the supply of a monetary metal runs out, it signals a total collapse in confidence in the fiat system. The public is only now finding out that the lifeboats are gone. If you are still waiting for a government or a regulator to tell you the truth, you are waiting for a rescue that will never come. In the new paradigm, trust is being replaced by physical possession. This geopolitical transfer of silver from west to east is a one-way street. Once that metal enters the private vaults of Texas, Switzerland, or the strategic reserves of China, it is not coming back to the COMEX to settle your paper contracts. The West is being hollowed out, atom by atom, while the public is told to focus on interest rate hikes and inflation targets that no longer reflect reality. We are moving into a brave new world where the only thing that matters is what you can negotiate with a tangible asset in your hand. Major Erickson sits in his office at Aberdeen, surrounded by spreadsheets and captured industrial ledgers from the Henschel factories. He has moved past the mechanical failures and the fuel consumption to look at the big idea, the cost of existence. What he finds is an economic death sentence that makes the King Tiger's battlefield performance irrelevant. The King Tiger was not just a fuel-hungry predator, it was an industrial black hole. Erickson's team calculates that the production of a single Tiger II required approximately 300,000 man-hours. In contrast, the American industry, focusing on standardized simplicity and mass production, was churning out M4 Shermans in a fraction of that time. To the Pentagon's shock, for the price and resources of one King Tiger, the United States could put an entire company of medium tanks on the field. Erickson notes a chilling strategic gap. The German philosophy of technical perfection meant they were building exquisite weapons, while the Americans were building a system of war. Each King Tiger required high-grade alloys, specialized labor, and a logistical intravenous drip of fuel, and parts that Germany simply no longer possessed. The fuel consumption data is the final nail in the coffin. Erickson realizes that even if Germany could have built 10,000 King Tigers, they could never have fueled them. The industrial warfare reality was that the side with the most efficient logistics and the simplest, most reliable machines would always win. The Germans had won the duel of the 88mm gun, but they had lost the war of the factory and the fuel drum. The King Tiger is a masterpiece of a dying empire, Erickson writes. It was a weapon built for a blitzkrieg that had turned into a war of attrition, a war where good enough in overwhelming numbers defeats technical perfection in limited quantities. The King Tiger was an elite predator in a world that now belonged to the moving factories of the United States. Erickson closes the final folder of the engineering report, titled Strategic Implications of the Panzerkampfwagen VI Osef. B. The hangar at Aberdeen is quiet now, the V12 Maybach engine having finally cooled. As he looks at the 70-ton silhouette, he realizes that the King Tiger was not just a tank, it was a warning, a physical manifestation of a military doctrine that had lost touch with the reality of modern industrial warfare. The investigation's conclusion is devastatingly simple. The side with the most resources can afford to waste them for tactical advantage, but the side with limited resources must optimize for efficiency. Germany did the opposite. They chased technical perfection in limited quantities, while the Americans embraced industrial standardization in overwhelming numbers. The fuel consumption data was the smoking gun. It proved that the Germans had built a weapon so hungry it eventually devoured its own logistics. A 70-ton tank that consumes 5 gallons of fuel just to warm up is not a weapon of war. It is a logistical hostage. Erickson's final entry notes that Panther and Tiger did not lose to the Sherman. They lost to the mobile factories of the United States. The Pentagon's shock eventually turned into a fundamental shift in American military doctrine. They learned that battlefield mobility, the ability to move, refuel, and repair anywhere, at any time, is far more valuable than the thickness of a single armor plate or the range of a single gun. The King Tiger became a steel dinosaur, a creature perfectly evolved for a world that no longer existed. As the sun sets over the Aberdeen Proving Ground, the King Tiger is moved to a permanent display. It remains a masterpiece of engineering, but also a monument to a strategic blind spot. It stands as a reminder that in the cold, hard logic of systems and logistics, the most powerful weapon is the one that can actually make it to the fight and stay there.